All right, so hello everybody. So I'm going to introduce my second pod interview guest, Clive Johnson. Clive Johnson is somebody who I know through ACX. In other words, he is somebody who has narrated some of my audiobooks, and he's a superb narrator. But but that is only 1% of what he does. And Clive has an extremely interesting background. He started in he was a marketing and consultant expert, and he did IT. But then he has also written a lot of books, and some very good books, some very thoughtful books. He wrote a book about God, and in which he addresses some of the concerns that were brought up by luminaries such as Maimonides and Spinoza concerning the reconcilability of God's putative omniscience and godliness with the presumption that God has other human-like properties. And now I have not read that book as thoroughly as I should, but I can tell you that it's good, and I can also tell you that Clive is unusual and that he has a very substantial background in both business and I guess religious philosophy, and that came out in the very good work he did for me, narrating my book on religion. And Clive has a lot to say, and I'm very pleased to have him here. And he and I are going to be doing a lot of interviews, I believe, I hope. So, Clive, go ahead and modify or add to what I just said there about you.
Well, I think you just given me a great introduction there. Thanks, John Michael. Yeah, actually, it was not so much marketing. My background it was in management consultancy, and previously in IT consultancy,
Hmm.
and more recently, I worked with an ex detective chief inspector of the
Wow.
London Metropolitan Police.
Could you tell us about
Uh,
that if you don't mind? Because I have an interest in true crime. What did you do there? I mean, a big interest.
Well, actually, it was really interesting. She's a very good friend of mine, a lady called Jackie Keddy,
Uh,
who's actually quite well known in corporate circles here. She's a great speaker, um, and we collaborated. I was actually doing some work for her when she was introducing a coaching program into the Metropolitan Police. And I did a little bit of consultancy work for her around that time. Coaching is one of the other areas I have some
that's
interest
right.
in.
And I want to hear about
Um,
that. Now, when you say coaching, because here in the states, when we hear the word coach, we think of the coach of a basketball team. But you
sure.
mean like life coaching or business coaching?
It was
Is that
more in a business
business coaching?
context.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So perhaps think of it as a style of management, if you like, or a style of communication, where the coach is really helping another person to get to the root of whatever it is within them, to help articulate ideas and shape them. And so the coach's skill is clever questioning and very intent listening.
Clive, I'm gonna sort of interrupt you a little bit right there. I would like to talk about this business coaching. So when you mentioned business coaching to me, a couple of possibilities as to what you had in mind occurred to me. Okay, so on the one hand,
Mhm.
you could be some guy who sort of goes in there and looks at the books and says, okay, well, you should open up an office in Jakarta, or you should fire this guy or hire this guy. Or you should invest
Sure.
in asbestos or whatever. Okay, so there's that. Okay, and that exists, and that's fine, right? And then but it seems to me that the kind of coaching you had in mind was okay. So some executive is he actually needs a little bit of help with maybe the ideas or getting his character straight or kind of aligning his personality with the business. That it seemed to be the kind of coaching you had in mind was kind of business minded kind of psychoanalysis almost. In other words, like you're helping align. So could you maybe clarify the
Yeah.
nature of the coaching that you did? Essentially,
I,
that's
I, I think I think that's right. I mean, I think the first type of um, intervention, if you like, that you described,
uh-huh.
I would tend to describe more as a consulting type role,
Okay.
someone
Okay.
actually giving advice.
Okay.
And if we're being very, very pure in defining what a coach does,
Okay.
it may be that some advice comes into it, but that's not something they would normally volunteer. That the real role is to actually tease out of the other person what the other person actually already knows themselves. It's something that's really buried within them. So it can focus on yeah, pretty much anything, even within a business context. It can be talking about relationships they have with other with colleagues, for example.
Now,
Uh,
what are these standard? What are these? So these are obviously the top. These are the deciders, right? I mean, you're not coaching the janitor. You're coaching one of the people who actually has
yeah,
executive power.
generally it's quite a high level generally, although it can apply at any at any level.
But now, what are some of the kind of conflicts or difficulties that you would help kind of resolve or ameliorate? So I'm a coach. I call you up. I have problems. What are the problems that I'm likely? I'm sorry, I'm not a coach. I'm an executive. I enlist your services. Now, what am I likely to ask you to help me with?
Well, it could well be a disagreement with a peer, for example,
Okay.
someone that is just not cooperating in a project that you want to get moving, that is proving to be a very difficult. There's a very difficult personal relationship, perhaps, that you want to 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 work out how you're going to handle that. Um, that will be, it's not always about problems or conflict. It could be about your ambition and actually forming a vision, forming a view of actually how you can achieve that, and actually being realistic about some of the obstacles that might be in the way and some of the things that you might need to do to achieve that.
So it sounds like the kind
Is
of thing I need, actually. I mean, although
well,
that's a
yeah, absolutely. It could well be in a situation where you are in a relatively new business project and at quite an early stage of shaping that and trying to anticipate what the different pitfalls might be, and perhaps there's some options about the different paths you can take, and how do you evaluate which one is lower risk, which one's going to give you a higher payoff, those sorts of questions.
no, I don't want to. If this is if there are other things you would like to discuss, we can do
Hmm.
that. I don't want to dwell on any one topic. Again, if there are other aspects of your career you'd like to highlight, I happen to be interested in this. Now, I got to ask though. I mean, this sounds like really great work. I mean, it sounds
Hmm.
like at least I would be just unbelievably interested in doing it. Now, I'm going to ask a question, and this is not this interview is definitely not rehearsed as well as you know. I don't know if anyone else knows it. I think they can probably tell, but I mean, this sounds like sort of a dream job. Now, if I may ask, what are you still doing it? It sounds as though you're not doing it so much now.
I'm not doing it so much now. No, no. It's partly because my my coaching work tended to focus on two things. One was the arena of conflict management,
Right.
where which was a focus for some years, and it was interesting. It was interesting work, and often very satisfying to see people move forward. But I think the problem is it's very important for a coach to be able to detach themselves from the emotional content of
What's going
the
on? Right.
situation they're working with. And I found that I wasn't very good at doing that.
Wow.
I do it in a coaching session, a meeting, but I would often come away and feel very angry on behalf of the client, for example.
That is interesting. That is interesting.
Or if some situation was described, and of course I was always only ever getting one perspective on this. One A situation was described that touched my sense of fairness, for example, which would often be the case if you're dealing with people with a grievance.
Because here's the thing, which is that there are okay. So the sort of fundamental. So let's suppose you're doing actual psychoanalysis, proper Freudian psychoanalysis, not some New Age bunk. Okay, and I don't know that it's really done anymore, but it used to be done, and those people were just phenomenally intelligent. But here's sort of the fundamental kind of paradox of psychoanalysis, which is that you had to be. It's not logic, right? It's not mathematics. You had to. I mean, you had to be smart, but your analytic instrument, if you were the analyst, was your ability to tune into their emotions. But the thing
Mm.
is that you could not. I mean, that was it, right? But you could not go in there and you could not be a blubbering wreck. So you had to empathize enough to know what they were feeling,
Sure.
but you had to be the analyst. I mean, the last thing the last thing the patient needs is some guy who's sharing the box of tissues with him blubbering away. That's the last thing he needs. So there was this paradox, right? But the thing is, what you were doing involved three things. So on the one hand, it involved your being able to kind of enter this executive's emotional space. It also involved your being able to understand it in a dispassionate, rational way. But then it involved an additional thing, which is not involved in the psychoanalysis situation, which is that you had to deal with some other guy um, to whom you did not, who you were not psychoanalyzing or whatever, who was causing problems. You actually had to deal with that person.
Exactly.
Wow.
There's an unseen third party, as it were.
And wow.
And
Uh-huh.
yeah, um, absolutely right. It's well known to psychologists and psychiatrists. Also, this problem of so-called transference, where,
That's a big problem. Yeah, it is.
yeah, you've got to be very, very careful.
Not to
In,
over project and not to over empathize or over empathize in the wrong way or
exactly. So actually, I found coaching to be exhausting because you would be having to self-manage yourself all of the time.
Jesus.
Really thinking about what you're saying and as best you can to be objective to yourself. Uh, and I don't think I'm alone in that. I think it is a very challenging task. It's not just a case of
I,
being able to ask a few clever questions
I,
and being able
something
to.
actually just occurred. Clive, can I turn off my chicken because I'm here in my I'm not at my
Sure.
studio in Manhattan. Here, hold on one second. So actually something just occurred to me, which is that okay, so most psychiatric care is quite poor, as anyone who's been to a psychiatrist knows. Now, I think a lot of that has to do, I now realize, with because I think that if you're in that situation, there's sort of a Scylla and Charybdis, right? The Scylla is that of basically doing what you did, which is over involving yourself emotion, which is basically understanding too much. And maybe
Yes.
understanding it projectively and therefore incorrectly, but probably understanding it too much and maybe understanding it sort of not quite in the indicated way. Still understanding it, but through this kind of Delphi kind of Einführung as opposed to Verstehen. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but way. Okay, so that's fine. But then the thing is that if you're actually sort of a psychiatrist, and you have to worry about lawsuits. So then the Charybdis is that of not really understanding squat and doing it kind of by the book,
Yeah.
and I think that's what. So I went to a psychiatrist a couple of years ago because I wanted some Xanax or something, and I mean the man was, I mean, had an IQ of around 7, but I mean, I did get my dope, I'll be honest, and that was it. I mean, but this was not exactly, Freud here. I mean, this guy was not smart. I mean, but I think that he might have been intelligent. I mean, he might have been intelligent, but his intelligence was not implicated in his. I think he wanted to kind of avoid the situation you were in, that
Yeah.
of over understanding or something. That is really.
Well, I'm not
Uh,
sure. Actually, most coaches or most psychiatrists actually do get to the point of really fully understanding what's going on inside the
uh-huh.
person. If you're perhaps looking at what's happening mentally and what they're saying, and you're picking up on things, and you're recognizing patterns, and you're relating back to
Right.
something I might have said before, and you're suggesting possibilities to them. But ultimately, they're the only person that can really work out for themselves what they're about. And we're very complex
Here we are.
beings. It's not just what's going on in the mind. It's the feelings, it's the memories, and it's the the sort of buried assumptions we make, and that there's an awful lot going on. Um, I,
Well,
I
mhm.
I constantly have to stop myself when I'm coaching from making assumptions. If I find myself making an assumption, as I'm forming
Yes.
a question, I've got to really test that very, very carefully with the other person.
Yeah, I was talking with back in the day, a long time ago. I was talking with a very, 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 very smart psychoanalyst. I mean, he's really old school. He was an army doctor in 1945. But yeah, he said that the best kind of psychoanalysis was the kind where you actually did not initially feel any kinship with the patient, because otherwise there was this flood of false insight which screwed
Mm.
everything up. Yeah, that you really, these a priori assumptions that you're likely to make will really stymie the analysis or derail it, or uh, yeah. So that kind of, here's the thing, which is that okay, so you were a coach, but the thing is that
Mm.
now my coaching instincts, and they're more than instincts, but are kind of springing to life here, which is that it sounds like, it sounds like you actually had, and again, I mean, this is sensitive material in many ways, but it sounds like you actually had a pretty decent business going, but that there was one sort of thing that I don't think the issue, if I may speculate here, it sounds as
Sure.
though you took, okay, so you were doing this, and then you became overly involved, or you were overly projective, or that there was something that was not going quite right. And if I may hazard a kind of some speculation here, I have a feeling that you then berated, you took yourself to task for this. You started saying, "Oh, I have problems. I'm not cut out for this." And I don't think that's what was going on. I think this does not have to do with neurosis on your part.
Mm.
Here's the thing. I think what was going on um, is that, and this is true in actual psychoanalysis, the kind which is not even domain specific analysis, is that, look, this whole idea of sort of total comprehension, this sort of godlike comprehension, which I guess you write about, right? I mean, uh, that's not a meaningful concept, or it's not an operational one. I mean, I think maybe what you have to do is circumscribe the goal, and maybe that's why. Like, if you're trying to sort of do a Vulcan mind meld with your client, yeah, then you'll go nuts, okay?
Mm.
But if you're trying to understand him, trying to understand him with respect to some specific objective that he has, then I think you can get everything going, right? Like this guy, who the hell knows? Like, he has a kid who's a drug addict, and then he has a wife who has a mustache or something. Who knows? He has all these problems, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but and that's great, but that's not your concern. Like, it is in a way, but his concern was, look, he's hit some kind of a roadblock. He wants to, like, merge with Glaxo or something, and there's some kind of international law that he's on the wrong side of. And you have to understand him enough as a business coach to negotiate that particular obstacle. And maybe you were insufficiently circumscribing your job duties. That
I think that's a fair comment. I do tend to, I'm not very good at, at leaving work in the office, so to speak. I take things home with me.
okay,
If there's a strong emotional content, if something's really pricked my conscience, if it's as I say, if it's something like some some injustice, I feel very strongly, and I feel very um, yeah, a lot of empathy for that individual. I hope it doesn't sound arrogant or anything, but in a fairly caring way. And I think when you begin to own other people's emotional problems
right,
and you take that with you, um, and you're not necessarily very good at dealing with it yourself,
that's okay.
then that does become a problem. I really wanted to be able to change the world almost. To if I had a mission behind the work that we were doing, it was really to see something change in the companies that we were working in. And I think I came to a realization that all too often that's pie in the sky, sadly.
Well, wait a second. Hold on, because okay, if your objective is to change the world, I mean, that might or might not be a pie in the sky. I mean, depends what you mean. But if your objective is to change something in the company, I mean, that doesn't seem, so outrageous. I mean, if they're wasting money on some useless project, or if the company policy is
Sure.
misconceived in some way, that, I mean, that surely that can be changed. Like, what? I'm not saying why this seems like it would be not a futile endeavor, what you were doing.
No, 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 no. Certainly there are many examples of that where, and certainly I can't think of an individual that we work with who
Right.
personally didn't benefit in some way and move forward. Um, but yeah, if you've got this emotional attachment to what you're doing, call it a passion if you like, um, I would like companies to be nice places to work. I suppose that's what it comes down to. I'd like people to really get on and be honest with each other, and especially if you're only working with one person, you might be able to help them change and help them to have a new perspective or build greater resilience or um, approach their colleagues in different ways. But you're probably not going to make much of an impact beyond that.
Now I'm gonna shift the conversation to slightly less landmine-ish material. I mean, slightly less, although maybe it's slightly more. But okay, so let's say you're called in, some executive, he's this billionaire, but now he's having problems taking the next step or whatever. Okay, so there's that. But now, in what ways are companies not nice places? Like, what are the sorts of ways in which, company? So you were called in to help some CEO run a company or some such. Now, what were the problems, the workplace problems that you were likely to encounter? The ones that,
Well,
yeah.
the focus of our work was on conflict management,
Okay,
but particularly where there was a disagreement between individuals or a grievance. Uh,
right.
um, so yes, we were from the outset dealing with a situation that was usually pretty ugly, where there were some very strong feelings and um, actually something that was going to be quite difficult to heal, perhaps. Um, so yeah, I'm not talking about every single situation, every single company. Obviously, there are many great places to work, and people are very happy with their colleagues. But with this particular kind of work, um, it was pretty much the norm. That there was something going on in the background that it might have been a boss overplaying the power that they have, and perhaps acting in a bullying way, for example, um, or someone that was struggling as they were being put through their paces by an HR department, um, and it's actually quite difficult to see what um, the cause of the grievance was.
No, I do have to. Here's the thing. So you mentioned this now. Okay, so as soon as you mentioned these company internal disputes, the first thing here was my thought process. Not that it's worth anything, but I think it's maybe a starting point. My initial thing was, okay, look, there are going to be some emotional problems, emotional conflicts, but these emotional conflicts are really going to have to do with. I mean, those are proverbially difficult to resolve. Now, what you can resolve is company policy, right? So if there's some kind of an emotional problem, it usually tends
Yeah.
to. And so the thing is that, were you dealing with the purely emotional aspect of it, or was your view like, okay, there's this friction here, so why don't we send Jones to the Hong Kong office and Brown to the Barbados, Paraguay office, and then we'll leave Smith here, and that'll be the end of it. Like, what was your approach? Because I would be inclined to solve it in a kind of purely logistical way, and I mean the emotional problems are going to be very hard to solve. That would be.
Well, that was another aspect of the work we did in mediation and in grievance investigation,
Uh huh.
where yes, you potentially have the warring parties, as it were, together, or you're actually called in by, for example, an HR department to broker or mediate the situation, um, or investigate an alleged grievance. And out of that, there could well come recommendations for changing company policy or taking some learning from what had happened, which could, obviously have an impact on other people in the company. But in a coaching
Uh
relationship,
huh.
or dealing on a one-to-one basis in a confidential setting, um,
Right. I
so
see. Okay.
you can only really work with that individual, helping them to deal or come to terms with the situation they're facing.
And this guy was not so powerful that he could just exile. the problematic employee in question to the North Pole or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And well, sometimes you'd find in a public sector organization, for example, that there would be a very senior guy who you would think would have that power and ability,
Uh huh.
because of the way that these organizations work and the different power brokers within them. It could still be very difficult for them to actually have an influence on changing changing their situation within the company.
Well, okay. I think we've discussed this aspect of your career enough for this purpose of this podcast. It's something we'll definitely discuss again. But
Hmm.
but it sounds as though like you had. Here's my kind of summary, my summary analysis, which is that you actually had a pretty viable business there, but there was some respect in which you had perhaps not entirely completely clearly delineated your objective, or like in other words, it's not that okay. What you were doing was great. I think that maybe now the thing is that when you find that there's something that is not possible to do, you stop trying to do it and you do some other related thing that is possible to do. And maybe you had to work a little bit on the second thing. Like you continue to try to do this impossible thing of maybe trying to fix people or something. Like what you were doing was good, and if you
Yeah.
shifted it just a little bit, but the thing you were doing was excellent, but it was impossible. Now, if you just changed it just a little bit, you would have been doing something that was possible and almost as good. That's the feeling I get, um, and maybe that was the problem. I don't know.
I think in this particular area,
Uh
it
huh.
is. Yes, I would agree in many situations. What you say is true. In this particular situation, it was coming to realization that to be doing this sort of work regularly was not a good fit for me
Okay.
because of the emotional burden that I would take from it. And
Jesus.
actually, that would apply in dealing with grievance investigations, with mediation, with any aspect of conflict management, because you are being sucked in, even though
Wow.
actually in the role you are objective, you are working overtime to be fair and to manage yourself. But I was finding, emotionally, I was carrying an awful lot myself and
Yeah. Wow.
taking that away and feeling angry at injustices and perhaps not seeing the changes I would like to see.
If I could, I mean, because I'm not going to belabor any of this, and you've been very candid, but I'll tell sort of our listeners a little bit about my own situation.
Hmm.
So, I started out actually wanting to be a psychoanalyst, and really went very, very far in the way of pursuing that. But the thing is that you have to have basically an MD or a PhD to be a psychoanalyst. And at the time, I didn't really want to get an MD. So I got a PhD in philosophy, and then I became so totally absorbed in that the psychoanalysis thing kind of went by the wayside. But nonetheless, I had to deal with really, really just, I mean, I did not really know the meaning of the word verminous, as in the adjective of vermin, until I'd put in some years in academia, but and so it was, and I converted that into work. I wrote some empiricism and the foundations of I became I studied sociopathy, psychopathy, and the different kind and the distinction between criminality, loss of identity, and bureaucratic context. These were things that, I mean, I am an intellectual, so I converted this into work product. No big
Hmm.
deal. Now I was on the receiving end of all of this, um, and that was that. But I did convert it into work, good work, frankly. But here's the thing, which is that then finally it got to the point where here's what happened, which is that after I finally rose to a position of not seniority, but I was like a member of the academic senate, and then I realized that um, all of these psychopathologies that I had been encountering in my colleagues and my supervisors, yeah, sure, they were all there. These people were all ghouls and misfits and screw ups or whatever, and that's all very interesting from a kind of psychoanalytic standpoint. But at the end of the day, what was really going on is it had to do with money. It had to do with institutional realities, structural realities, and like you can psychoanalyze people, you can do this, you can do that. That's all neat, but at the end of the day, there just wasn't that much money, and there were just institutional realities. So then, and it really had to do with kind of underlying economic realities. And so then I became kind of interested in economics. But like I realized that a lot of this dishonesty with people just had to do with the fact that the department chair, I didn't see the numbers. The department chair did, and he knew that certain classes had to not be taught, certain classes had to be taught if he was to continue to eat.
Mm.
And so a lot of his dishonesty emanated from that, and I didn't really know that. All I saw was this guy who was shutting down good ideas and greenlighting bad ones. But what I didn't see was that there were economic justifications for his behavior. They were not moral justifications, but they were economic ones. And and so then I started shifting my focus more to economics, which I don't really know anything about, but I'm interested in it. So okay, now I'm gonna ask you a question. So after you left, when did you leave that particular line of work, Clive?
That's probably about 3 or 4 years ago now.
Okay, but in that time you've done some pretty substantial, and I don't want to keep you too long, but you did some pretty substantial work. You've become a minister, right?
I did, yes. Interfaith minister, organization called the One Spirit Interfaith Foundation, which actually originated in New York
Wow.
and still exists there. But there is a sister organization in the UK, and it runs a 2-year seminary program, which I completed last year.
Wow. Oh, so
Yeah,
wow.
yeah,
So this is not
very.
like a 2-week correspondence course. This is
No, no, it was quite unlike any training that any other training that I've undertaken before. Actually, it was very much non-academic.
wow.
Um, in fact, we were told, we had assignments to deliver each month. Keep them to 2 pages of A4.
Uh-huh.
There was you could use very small font, I think, if you wanted to use a lot of words.
Uh-huh.
And, we're not interested in grammar. We're not interested in how many books or papers you reference. This is all about self-reflection, and it will be reflecting perhaps on how your worldview has changed as a result of being exposed to a new spiritual practice, for example. What did I learn from this? How did I respond to it? Did I like it or didn't I? So the training was very much about personal development, about connecting with your inner being, um, as much as following what might be called an external curriculum.
Okay.
So fascinating approach.
Now you do realize, I don't know if I have a feeling you may not know this consciously, but you do realize that, so you were in these shark infested waters of the business world, and then you became this spiritual person, and you do realize that this is kind of a reaction, like you were looking for. I think, look, first you were trying to heal people or reconcile them with one another in one way, and now you're trying to do it in a different way, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely. I mean, I think coaching, as it were, or working conflict management field is a ministry of sorts. It is actually trying to bring a particular gift or skill to help people and to mediate and to actually help them find a way forward. And there's no dissimilarity there with the kind of ministry work I do now.
right, right, and but I mean, now you're an interfaith minister. You're not like the one faith minister.
No, no.
You're not the absolutist kind of to hell with everyone else type minister. So again, it's a form of reconciliation. It is conflict management. I mean, there are people who believe one thing, and then there are people who believe another, and you want them
Mm.
to not be at each other's throats. That seems to be part of the idea. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe,
No, no, absolutely. I mean,
yeah.
interfaith for me is about recognizing that certainly all of the major world faiths I know a little bit about, and it is really just a little bit. I must be honest,
That's
as
okay.
well as some of the more minor faiths and other esoteric followings, pretty much point to the same sort of truths and messages at the end of the day. And of course, each of us has our own way of connecting. and our own symbols and stories and the personalities and ways of understanding these different concepts. Some of that's culturally related, obviously related to what perhaps we've grown up with.
Well, a new can of worms just opened up. I don't want to keep you because this has been a long podcast and it's pretty late where you are. But I do want to end during our next podcast. I'm going to
Mm,
ask you some questions about Christianity. I also want to ask you some things about Islam,
sure.
and because I had a girlfriend who was Muslim, and
Hmm.
it was when I actually, so she wanted me to convert. It didn't really go very far, but the thing is that I actually read some of the material, and it was pretty damn reasonable. I mean, it was not anything. It wasn't even remotely similar to what you are led to believe it to be. It
Sure.
was,
Sure.
and I mean, it was in fact actually it was sort of I mean, for lack of a better word, it was kind of left wing. I mean, like, yeah, there were some superficially misogynist things, and I'm talking about the Hadith here. I'm not talking about 20th century apologists, but then, that there would be these long sort of like, we're not saying that women are inferior. We're just saying that there would be these long disclaimers in the original texts, but almost sort of left wing and kind of, it was not this sort of illiberal fundamentalist kind
Mm,
of religion that if you actually read the text, I don't know what the
sure.
actual practitioners, are going to vary in terms of their sensibilities and modalities and all that. But then I have some questions
Well,
about
we have another problem there as
Oh yeah,
well.
please speak. Yes.
We're reading an English translation,
Oh, okay.
and as I understand it, I don't speak Arabic, but I understand that the meaning behind the Arabic of the Quran is
Uh,
very difficult to translate into English.
I would
Um,
think so. Yeah.
it's known as a living scripture. In other words, it's going as I think all scripture is really from any faith. Every time you read it, and especially if you understand and you tune in to the real meaning, the very deep meaning of the words that are used in the
Oh,
text, um, then yes, you're going to get a different picture. But it's the same in Christianity as well.
oh, I would think so. I would think so.
Very much so, very much so, I'm sure.
Now, go. Well, for the last sort of little segment of this interview or whatever. So okay, so you were in the business world. You were in these killing fields of corporate whatever, and then okay, and now you shifted to this other domain, this seemingly very different domain. Now,
Yes.
I have a feeling that there's a next step on the horizon. Are you going to combine these two things again? Are you going to re-enter the business world, but in a slightly but in a way that is now informed by what you've learned in the course of your religious studies, or what's the next? There's got to be a next step. I do, because I'm seeing a thesis, antithesis, synthesis situation on the horizon here.
Yeah, I think it's unlikely. I think it's very unlikely I would go back into the business world. I think I personally don't have the resilience for that now. Um, my focus at the moment is much more on writing.
Oh, okay, all right.
Uh, what I'm very keen to do is to get a bigger audience with that and to make it more interactive. So to have more
That is
retreats,
interesting.
for
That is interesting.
example, and workshops that are running around some of that work.
That is interesting. That is
Um,
interesting. What you just said.
yeah, so to ultimately make it pay, but to enjoy it as well, and to use it as my means of exploration and I have no idea really at the moment quite where that will take me.
Well, this is interesting. I'm gonna impose my own whatever on you. Because okay, so okay, now here I'm gonna can the modesty or false modesty, but um, okay, so look, as an author, right? As authors, we know, okay, so you can write a book, it can be the greatest book in the world, whatever, but it's the sort of unilateral thing. Now,
Hmm,
what an author wants, what a real thinker wants, is engagement, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
And the question is, how do you now you can write a treatise, and then you get some guy with an IQ of 180 in Tibet who reads it, but okay, that's great. So you have one positive review on Amazon, but you want more than that. You want something that's real time, but you don't want it to be this sort of cheese ball, but not sort of like, but you want it to be substantial. like you want a living treatise, like you want to do what the treatise writers of yesterday did, but you want it to be kind of interactive. Like you
Yeah,
want, and how do you do that? Like technically, how do you do it? I mean, like there's
I,
an entire new medium that has to be invented almost.
I think ultimately I think ultimately social media has quite an important role to play in this.
Yes.
Now, I really shied away from social media until really quite recently. I've had several attempts to engage with.
Tell me about that because I'm having real problems with it. Like I'm swamped, and to the extent that I'm not
No,
swamped, it's not working for me. Tell me.
I, I think I've tried maybe 5 or 6 times to engage with Facebook,
Uh huh.
and I came back to this probably about 2 or 3 months ago, and actually at the moment I'm really enjoying my time on Facebook. I am beginning to get
Wow.
some good feedback. I'm actually enjoying some of the posts that I'm reading that other people are putting up, things that I wouldn't have come across otherwise.
And thank you for upvoting my Facebook audiobook philosophy audiobook
Oh,
fan page. By the way, that
that,
was appreciated.
goes without saying.
Philosophy audiobooks on Facebook, people. Yep, that's right. Go there. No need to
Um,
make a contribution. No need. No need. No need.
so yeah, I think when it's used well. For example, actually, when I was doing the ministry course, we had a private group that was set up for students, and that was used very effectively for sharing things that were relevant to each of us. It was not just about posting latest photographs of
Your
baby's
trip to
party, whatever,
right.
or just some sort of little trivia that's come up. Um, but I am beginning to engage with it. I'm still learning, and I've still got to grow my audience. But I think there's real potential there, particularly if you start with some of these groups, these forums, um, and then move on to perhaps creating meetups, be they virtual meetups using, I don't know, Google Hangouts or something like that,
Right.
or actual physical meetups or retreats. The internet actually does seem to provide quite really a very good platform.
Yeah, it does.
Once you can tap into it and actually get that visibility, and actually people who are interested in the same field are hopefully ultimately going to find you. They're going to be attracted to it, and they're going to engage with it, and they're going to contribute as well.
Now I got to ask though, Clive, are you doing this on your own? See, that's the
Uh,
question I have.
to some extent, I'm in the throes of launching a workshop, which will run actually around this time next year. At There's a very nice retreat centre in west of England, which I am running with a friend of mine who I only met quite recently. And there can be advantages, obviously, in running something with another person. Financially, it can be quite challenging because you've got to cover
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. Yeah.
as opposed to one.
Jesus.
Um, but yes, that is an initiative where I'll be working with another person. But generally speaking, yes, I would do things on my own.
But you don't have like sort of corporate sponsorship. Like you don't have Jack Ma's arm around you, or
No, absolutely none of that. I'm
so
afraid.
this is a grassroots thing. That's what I'm
Yeah,
asking.
very much so. Very much
Okay,
so.
right. Wow.
And there's always going to be a certain amount of risk involved with it as well, because there will be some costs up front. For example, this venue I mentioned next year, even though we haven't started the marketing yet, we've already had to put a deposit to to
Jesus.
book uh, to book a slot that weekend.
You're talking about a
Uh,
physical rental. Is that what you're talking about when you say book a
yeah,
slot?
and we will lose
Jesus, well, that's going to be expensive as hell, man. That's what, thirty
we
thousand
lose
pounds or something.
lose a bit of money if it doesn't work out.
If I may ask, how much was the rental? It's a very gauche question, but what?
Well, we worked on the basis that we'd have a minimum of 12 people on this workshop running over an extended weekend. So it's like 2 days, two nights. And we had to put down, I think it was £280.
Oh,
So,
that's not so bad. Well,
yeah.
but it's
So,
still something.
and I think we took the view as well that, well, if the worst comes to the worst, just we two will go. We'll pay for ourselves and we'll enjoy it. So, yeah, but you do take risks. You do have to look ahead. As we were saying earlier about marketing, I think some things you don't know are going to work or hit the spot until you try them.
And what kind of writing are you are doing?
My writing at the moment is very much focused on uh, folklore, fairy tales, and
Oh, that's
mythology.
right. That's right.
So the book I have coming out in early October takes a number of stories from the Tales of the Arabian Nights.
Oh, wow.
Some of them are quite well known, like the one of the Sinbad stories in there, the Aladdin stories in there, and others are less well known. And what I've tried to do is to research and also myself to reflect on the meaning in these stories. What was it that they were really trying to teach? And I did this previously with a book on fairy tales. So, for
Yes, I'm looking it up
example,
right now. Yeah, it's a great book, by the way. It's a great book.
thank you. So you would take, I don't know, for example, the Red Riding Hood story.
Oh, fairy story. Yeah, I should tell our yeah, no, this is a really interesting thing. So it's about it was okay. So there's this book. It's called Fairy Stories and Fairy Stories: Traditional Tales for Children, Contemporary Tales for Adults. And this is you've kind of tweaked Grimm's fairy tales and in such a way that they're meaningful both to adults and children and narrated them. Is that right?
Yes, well, I'd retell,
That's
for
right.
example, a Grimm story, and in fact, actually would go back earlier than the Grimm story because the Grimms had, in the case of Red Riding Hood, they had their own, they had two versions,
Oh, wow.
uh, and they were based on earlier tellings of that same story.
And it's available in
Uh,
both audio and paper form. Is that right for our listeners?
yeah, it's available in Audible, it's paperback, and it's also on Kindle.
It's damn good, by the way. I highly recommend it. So it's Clive Johnson. That's the author and narrator. It's Fairy Stories and Fairy Stories. That's the title. Traditional tales for children, contemporary tales. I urge you to buy it. And actually, it's on Kindle Unlimited, so you can get it for free. I don't,
Mm.
which I always find is a huge mistake, but that's another matter. Don't, yeah,
We're flirting with that one, I
yeah,
think.
yeah. Change that, man, because you're not gonna make a nickel. But anyway, so go ahead and tell us some more about yes,
So I'm sort of playing the same idea with the Arabian Nights, and so there will be a retelling of the original tale. And in the
right,
case of the Arabian Nights, there are at least four well-known English translations. Um, so you already have different interpretations of the story, and I've taken a lot of poetic license with it. Sort of not necessarily stuck to the
well, that's fine.
to the original, but more or less there. I'm trying to keep the same character coming through, or the same general plot line, and the same messages. And then I have written a parallel story, usually set in
Oh, I like that.
a sort of contemporary situation,
Wow.
which which is specifically written for adults. I have to put all sorts of caveats over the book to say definitely not for bedtime reading for children. Um, and yeah, where I've tried to bring out the same messages, and then I add a little commentary on it as well. Although, of course, the invitation is to form your own view. So, for example, the Aladdin story, I set in Hong Kong amongst
Wow.
an antique smuggler
Jesus.
bringing antiques across from the mainland, and um, this sort of boy's coming of age, and actually becoming quite shrewd and clever, and um, which you find in the original Aladdin story. He doesn't immediately rush and wish for everything in
So
one
you're
go.
not just retelling it. I mean, this is sort of wholesale fiction creation here. I mean, I understand it has a basis in.
It is, and the one I'm starting to work on at the moment, and I'm doing some research on this. In fact, I'm doing some research tomorrow at the British Library on this as well. Is I haven't decided which yet, but to take some of the Greek myths and to apply the same idea.
Now you
So
say you have. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead, please.
all of these things, these great stories of old mythology, folklore, and so on, had a purpose to to actually teach, typically children who were coming of age and they needed to understand what their responsibilities would be and to be made aware of some of the pitfalls they might fall into and so on. But yeah, when you tap into this, really work with the story, it's fascinating what comes up. And I think this is where my whole area of interest is at the moment, the overlap between mythology, to some extent psychology, and perhaps more the Jungian psychology.
The Jungian, you said, as in.
Yeah,
Okay,
Jungian, yes,
right.
touches a lot on this sort of area.
He does, yeah.
And yeah, you're tapping into some of the thinking of the likes of Joseph Campbell, for example,
Yes.
in this field, um, but also with religion. You know, a lot of what we read in Scripture is a story with a message. A lot of the words of Jesus, for example, in the
Right.
Christian tradition, is a story, is a parable
Yes.
with a message. Um, and yeah, so I'm very interested in this crossover and what we can do to make it alive and to, as it were, bring the magic out of it, to bring the real thing that touches deep within and causes you to think. Perhaps not even to think, but to understand in a new way.
What interests me? Okay, so I can see how. Hold on 1 second. I just have to. Just 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. What interests me? Okay, so there seem to be kind of two different sort of syntheses going on. On the one hand, you're okay. So you're taking these sort of ancient tales and then bringing them to life. So there's that kind of synthesis. Like you want these things to be living, not dead. You don't want the tale of Aladdin or whoever just to be this sort of relic. So you want to bring that to life. So you're doing that, okay? And
Yeah.
I think you're pretty much all over that one. I mean, I don't think there's too much. Um, that particular kind of endeavor is not that. I mean, that's something that has to be done. But I don't think that there are too many kind of questions as to what that's about. I mean, that's your retelling a story. Now that you can do just sitting at your computer, you can figure out that one. Now, but the other sort of synthesis that you're trying to accomplish, and which I think you'll succeed at, uh, but that's the really interesting one, which is the kind of which is bringing the okay, because right now the big problem for writers is that it's really non-interactive. You write a book and that's it.
Mm.
And what you're trying to do is kind of bring the writer and the reader, or the teller and the listener, kind of together, make it, but not in a sort of debased emotional way, but sort of kind of redefine the whole nature of literary endeavor. Sort of make it a living thing. So you're actually trying to breathe life into these stories that have already been told, but then there's something bigger you're trying to do, which is that you're actually trying to make the act of storytelling be a living thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's what oral storytelling is all
Right.
about. And all I'm trying to do, perhaps not always very successfully, is to take the skills of an oral storyteller, which is something which is another activity I've engaged in
Right.
quite a lot actually this year, by the way, and have learned a lot through training and observing and working with some brilliant storytellers. But actually, to put that on paper as well, um, in a way, as you say, that comes alive.
And you would also like to make some money at this. I mean, that's not meant in a sort of
Yeah.
invidious way, but I mean, look, I mean, financial market success is a proof of something. I mean, that it's not to be scorned. And okay, all right. I don't know. It sounds like these are really, really bold, and I mean, these are things that I'm very, very, very interested in.
Mm.
The question, I mean, in many ways, very interested. And the question I have is, uh, you know, um, well, basically, it needs to be a little more. Hmm, how to make it more defined? Like, how do you make this? like we're still a long way from the blueprints, as it
I
were.
I think it's evolving,
Okay.
and I think I take the view that everything is evolving. Everything we create is evolving. Every time you read a story or you tell a story, that's going to have new meaning for you, or it's going to be told in a slightly different way, or cause you to focus on something new. And it's the same with a project or an idea. Um, there is a passion behind it. There's a motivation behind it. But if probably the one way, well, it's not the only way, but one of the main ways that I've changed in the last few years is going from someone that was always very goal objective focused, which can be obviously very important and does play a very important part in business planning, for example,
Hmm.
or if you're seeing through a project with a particular budget and deadline. But this kind of work doesn't necessarily have a fixed deadline.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily have an ending. Even it's something that hopefully can grow. It's something that maybe others will get involved in. It will take on a life of its own. Um, and I find that at the micro level as well. Actually, when you're writing, a story will take on a life of its own. Um, so yeah, I don't really know where it's all going ultimately. I'm just enjoying being a part of the process at the moment, and hopefully, this ability to keep nurturing it and to be inspired by it is going to continue for me.
Well, I'm going to impose because okay, so my listeners know that I because I actually one of my podcasts was my actual business school application, right?
Hmm.
I just read it out because that's one thing I'm doing, which is the sort of total honesty podcast. And yes, and so to my listeners, yes, I actually was accepted with funding
Well
yesterday.
done.
So now, but here's the question. Now, the whole point of this program, which is it's a very practical program. The orientation is very practical. The idea is you go, so it's at the University of Wisconsin. You go there with an idea, which they approve, and then by the time you leave, you actually have a business. That's the whole point. Just for my listeners. Now, here's the question I would ask, and this is the exact opposite of the way I used to think. But here's the question I would ask is, um, like, let's say you were applying to a similar program with this idea. Like, here's what I would want to know. I would want to see like a definite proposal, and then I would want to know where the money is
Oh,
coming from. Like,
yep.
because let's say, because if you try and fund this on your own, right? I mean, this is going to be a sort of very capital intensive. Basically, what I would here's sort of if I were a business school person, I would ask you the following: like, okay, so what exactly do you want to do, and who's gonna front the money? Like, do you have some kind of sponsorship? Because that would make things a lot easier, right?
I think a business school person or anyone in
Uh-huh.
business would despair, kind of the approach I described, because exactly that they'd really want to know how. I was very clear about what my goals were, what my plan was for achieving them, what my risk plan was, uh, how I'd costed each item, where the revenue was going to come in, all of those things. And
Uh-huh.
that's all well and proper in a
You,
pucker
you
business plan.
okay?
I think I'm probably not quite in that arena. I'm kind of not aiming for maximum profitability. I'm not aiming for achieving something by a particular point in time.
Okay.
This is something which is evolving,
Okay.
and I think my approach is to take stock from time to time of where it's going, and to be careful. If I start spending a lot of money and I'm not getting much return, then I'm going to know that pretty quickly, of course. Um,
No, I'm seeing
but
a lot of potential here. I was not
yeah,
saying that.
there's
I was not.
things like the marketing approach
Yeah.
I'm taking. It is sort of, I've done a lot of research. I've read what other people say about it. And I'm trying to apply that. I'm trying to learn from others. But at the same time, I'm perhaps not doing it totally to the book. um,
Well, I'm saying this from the viewpoint of, look, if I had $1 billion, which I don't, um, but the thing is, and I were listening to you, I would think, well, look, here's an opportunity to. I think this person is onto something. And this is not about shutting you down. It's about turning. It's just about articulating, giving it a little bit of definition, or at least the kind of
Sure,
definition that.
sure.
I mean, because here's the thing, which is that I mean, you have the credentials here. I mean, I'm looking at your Amazon page. Okay, so you have a managing conflict at work that is by you and Jackie Ketty, who you mentioned.
Yep.
Picturing God, the hell of a book, by the way. Thank you, which I read. The Fairy Stories and Fairy Stories, great book. Managing coaching at work. This is by you and Jackie Ketty. And then Complete Guide to Managing People, Clive Johnson, and Clive Johnson and the Arabian Nights and Arabian Nights. So that's a pretty hefty. And then you also have your background doing coaching in the business world and in IT. I mean, I mean, you have a lot of credentials here. So I think that something should definitely come of this. I want to know. I just want to know.
I think you're right in coming back to this point about how everything fits together.
Yeah.
Everything does come together at a certain point if you trust it to. I think probably where I am, where I'm very much, and this is really totally alien to the business world, is that I am to some extent going with the flow. I'm trying to tune in more at more of an intuitive level than
Okay.
actually at a very hard, objective, driven level, if I can put it like that.
Sure.
And um, yes, you have to be mindful of what you're doing and where you're going, and you have to take action and push at opportunities. It's not a case of everything coming to you, but I think when you do start to tune into something which is purposeful,
Uh-huh.
if you have my kind of belief in a divine, you know, power, however that's defined
Right.
as a person or whatever, um, then if you can be open to that, fully open to that, it's going to lead you into interesting territory. Perhaps not exactly where you expect to go. So I think that's where I'm going with some of this, and I don't know where it's leading. And if you did come to me with $1 billion, I think I would immediately start thinking of new things that perhaps a retreat center somewhere would be great to do. Where you could run lots of
Well, that's
workshops.
that's one question actually. This is a good thought exercise, which is that okay? So nobody's going to give you $1 billion, okay? But let's say a guy who has $1 billion says, "Look, I'll give you $100,000. Now, what are you going to do with it?" I mean, that's not a question you have to answer now, but that is a good.
That
That's
that that is one where you'd really have to sit with it. Where I would have to really sit with it. I'd
because
really have to
because
reflect on
I
it.
would give you
Yeah,
$100,000, but I would like to know kind of where it's going and
exactly.
paying like, oh, I'd pay my credit card bills. That's not really an answer.
No, 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 and quite right.
Uh,
You know
yeah.
you want a well thought through answer for that. No, absolutely.
And I mean that's not unreasonable. And I mean, great. Uh, Look, I mean, people who have managed to convey their message. I mean, there may have been a grassroots component to it, but I mean, they had friends and they had sponsors, and everybody has somebody. It's not. Money is not totally horrible.
Hmm.
It has its moments, and so well, look. But I think we there's a lot for us to discuss. But I think
Sure,
I think there's been an extremely productive discussion. And I'm gonna go ahead, Clive. I'm gonna go ahead and stop. I'm gonna stop recording, and then you and I can have a few final words.
sure.
So to my audience members, this is Clive Johnson. So that's Clive Johnson. Okay, Clive Johnson, and you can check out his books on Amazon. He has narrated some of my books, Existentialism and the Philosophy of Religion. Did a hell of a job, and he's narrating another one, Identity, which is a pretty substantial book.
Hmm.
And and I now see that all these things kind of relate to what you're doing. Okay, so there's
Sure.
religion, and then there's existentialism, which is kind of anti-religion, and then there's identity, which is about who am I? Okay. Anyway, but so this is Clive Johnson, and Clive Johnson has a very rich past, and now Clive Johnson is engaged on this. I have on what I have no doubt will be in due course an extremely fruitful enterprise. existentially and monetarily. At the same time, there are certainly some intermediate questions. There's some bridges to be crossed. And those of us who would like to invest in Clive would like answers at some point to those questions. But that's okay. And you will be hearing more. There will be, I think, probably more podcasts of this sort. And
I hope
with
so,
that,
yeah.
no, Clive, you hold the line, and I'll see the rest of you later. Bye. All right. So, okay, we